He wasn't supposed to make it, not with that background, not in that world. But somehow, Kamikaze Chris clawed his way into the spotlight, only to lose everything in a single, gut-wrenching moment. How did a street racer from the roughest part of Oklahoma become a legend, and then crash so hard the pieces scattered across the internet? Keep watching, because what came next, no one saw coming. Chris didn't grow up with a silver spoon, or any spoon really. His childhood wasn't marked by luxury, but by survival. In a cramped home in a rough neighborhood of Oklahoma City, every dollar mattered. And most weeks, there weren't enough of them. Clothes were handed down until they were barely cloth. Dinner wasn't guaranteed. And if Chris wanted something, anything, it was on him to earn it. But here's the twist. Instead of breaking him, that struggle forged something unshakable. At just 3 years old, Chris was already riding a motorcycle. Not some battery-powered toy. A real machine. While other kids were watching cartoons, he was gripping handlebars, learning how to balance speed with control. It wasn't about cars yet, not even close. His first love was racing, in any form he could get his hands on. By the time he was old enough to understand competition, Chris was knee-deep in dirt bike racing, facing off against older, bigger, faster riders. But he didn't care. He wasn't racing for glory. He was racing for something deeper. For the thrill of outpacing expectations, of beating odds that had always been stacked against him. Twice a week he'd line up at the starting gate, not with a fancy setup or big-name sponsors, but with raw grit and a second-hand bike he kept running with money earned mowing lawns, chopping trees, pumping gas, whatever it took. And here's the kicker. He wasn't even a car guy back then. He was a racing guy. Give him wheels, and he'd find a way to win. BMX, dirt bikes, maybe even a lawnmower if you dared him. Chris didn't need comfort. He needed velocity. And every bolt he turned, every dollar he scraped together, was a step closer to the life he wanted. But that was only the beginning. The real story starts when he meets someone who would change his life and eventually hand him the keys to a legend. But we'll get to that in a minute. Some friendships are born on the street, others in school. But for Kamikaze Chris, it happened under the glow of garage lights, deep in the Oklahoma night. That's where he met Justin Big Chief Shearer, a teenager with a passion for speed and a busted-up Pontiac that refused to quit. Chris wasn't some fanboy hanging around for clout. He was right there in the grease, elbows deep, wrenching late into the night. They didn't bond over parties or games. They bonded over busted knuckles and borrowed tools. Two kids with no business being in the street racing scene, except for the fact that nobody could stop them. Big Chief had the car, a 1972 Pontiac Le Mans they'd later call the Crow. Chris had the hustle, and together, they made magic. But here's where it gets wild. It wasn't just about racing. It was about building something from nothing. Every night spent tuning that car was a lesson. Every burnout, a test. And Chris, he soaked it all up. While others were partying or sleeping, he was learning how to make steel move faster than it should. He didn't need a classroom. He had a cracked driveway and a dream that refused to die. And then came the moment. Chris started building cars of his own. First, a beat-up Chevy Love with a small block, then a Blazer. Then came the real beast, a 1971 A-body Chevelle, dipped in an obnoxious green that screamed rebellion. It wasn't pretty, it was mean, loud, unapologetic, and it ran nines. Chris didn't just enter the scene, he kicked the door in and dared anyone to challenge him. But that's not all. He wasn't just driving fast, he was driving hard. Muscle it down the road, push it till it breaks, full send type of fast. He earned his nickname Kamikaze, not because he was reckless, but because he drove with a kind of instinct that danced on the edge of chaos. No gimmicks, no fear. Just a man who felt most alive when he was inches from disaster. Still, the real story, the one that would change everything, was parked under a tarp, gathering dust. A car that didn't belong to him. Not yet. A car with a legacy, a ghost, and a destiny waiting to collide with Chris's own. And when it did, everything would change. It was more than just a car. It was a legend built from scraps, and a ghost from the past. Chris had known Tyler Flip Pretty since childhood. Flip wasn't just a racer. He was the loudest, boldest personality in the group. And his ride? a flat black 1981 Chevy El Camino that looked like it came straight out of a Mad Max fever dream. They called it the Elko. And it wasn't just patched together, it was practically glued together. Rumor had it that it was held in place with silicone, JB Weld, duct tape, and more Bondo than a body shop uses in a year. But when Flip showed up to race, people looked. And when he won, and he often did, it made the loss sting twice as hard, because that beat-up Frankenstein machine wasn't supposed to be fast, but it was. Then Flip passed away, and everything stopped. For over a year, the Elko sat under a tarp, silent, forgotten by some, but not by Big Chief, not by Chris. Because when the time came to breathe life back into it, there was only one person Chief trusted to carry the torch, Kamikaze Chris. No hesitation, no second guessing. Just a quiet handoff between friends. A symbol of trust. A challenge from the past. The first time Chris turned that ignition, the engine didn't just start. It roared, like it had been waiting for him all along. But the Elko wasn't about to make things easy. On its first real drive, a rear brake locked up and caught fire. And that was just the beginning. Before long, Chris had broken the car so bad it needed a full rebuild. But here's the twist. Instead of doing what he'd always done, building the engine with his own two hands, Chris took a shortcut. A friend offered him a pre-built 582, and against his instincts, he said yes. That decision would haunt him. 13 rebuilds in a single season. 13. It was a nightmare. Run it. Blow it up. Rebuild. Again and again. Like running a funny car team on a backyard budget. Most guys would have walked away. But not Kamikaze Chris. Because this car wasn't just a machine. It was history. It was Flip. It was pain and pride and promise rolled into one. And Chris wasn't about to let it die, but even he couldn't predict the chaos still to come. When you've had enough of losing, you either quit, or you go all in. Kamikaze Chris didn't even blink. After that disaster season with the cursed 582, he made a decision that would redefine everything. He opened up his savings, looked at the pieces of his shattered dream, and picked up the phone. It was time to stop patching things together. This time, he was building a monster. He teamed up with Graham Jones at Fast Times Motor Works to design something serious. An all-aluminum, 632 cubic inch beast stacked with 4 stages of nitrous. Not 1, not 2, 4. Overkill? Maybe. But that's exactly what Chris was aiming for. Total domination. The kind of power that didn't whisper. It screamed, but it didn't stop there. In the cramped confines of his home garage, Chris and his right-hand man Les dove into a full back-half chassis conversion. They weren't some pro race team with a fancy shop. Just 2 guys, some tools, and enough stubbornness to rebuild Rome if you handed them enough duct tape and bad coffee. Their mission? Get Kamikaze back on OKC's top 10 list, where he belonged. The summer of 2017, the beast was back on the streets, and people were watching. The Elko roared louder, ran harder, and looked meaner than ever. Chris was winning races again, making a statement. The underdog was off the leash. But here's where it gets tricky. Something still felt off. Deep down, Chris knew the car wasn't where it could be. He didn't build to settle. He built to win. And if that meant tearing things down again just to do it better, so be it. Under the hood, he started over, again. A new drivetrain came together, part by part. Wiseco internals, Crower and Pack valve train. A fuel injection system from Fuel, injector development. And running the whole show? A Haltech EFI that also controlled his new 6-stage nitrous system. Yeah, you heard that right. 6 stages. It was chaos barely held together by discipline. A car that demanded respect, or else. But the more power Chris stacked under the hood, the more unstable the ride became. It was like training a wild animal. The line between victory and disaster was razor thin. And Chris? He was racing it every single night. But even with all that muscle, there was one thing they could never upgrade. The curse that came with the Elko's legacy. And it was about to strike. With every pass. Down the street, Kamikaze Chris was dancing closer to disaster. The El Camino, now brimming with more power than ever before, was fast, loud, and terrifying. But even with all the upgrades, some things couldn't be fixed. Like the fact that it still sat on a stock 117-inch wheelbase with a 62.5-inch drive shaft. That was way too long for how violently the car launched. It was a street car by classification, but it handled like a short-bed truck with a vendetta. Every component had a purpose. The suspension was a surgical balance of QA1 coilovers and pack springs. The front end had been re-engineered in Maryland and installed in Chris's own garage. They even ditched the radiator to shave weight, swapping in a custom ice water cooling system instead. That's how deep they were in. Nothing was off limits if it made the car faster. But all that power came with a price. Traction became a constant battle. The more horsepower Chris packed under the hood, the more unpredictable each run became. He wasn't just tuning a car, he was taming a dragon. The Elko had a wild soul. It wasn't forgiving. It never gave you more than one mistake. And Chris knew that better than anyone. And still, he kept pushing. Because to Chris, racing wasn't a weekend hobby. It was a full-on obsession. Every nick in the frame, every dent in the body, every late night in the garage told a story. The El Camino wasn't just built with parts. It was built with pain, with grit, with the kind of sacrifice most people run from. By day, Chris ran a modest heating and air business. But by night, he was deep in the garage, checking spark plugs, cleaning Lexan windows, dialing in tire pressure, tightening bolts like lives depended on it. He didn't have a team of engineers or a sponsor with deep pockets. It was just him, his crew, and a dream. Every dollar he had went into the car. And sometimes, let's be real, even dollars he didn't have. But here's the twist. All that time, all that pain, all that fire, it was leading him straight into the worst moment of his life. The kind of wreck that ends more than just a car. And it happened faster than anyone could have predicted. It happened in a flash. One of those nights where everything feels just a little off, but you push through anyway. July 2020. Chris was filming for Street Outlaws, the cameras rolling, the pressure mounting. The El Camino had been acting up. A sensor on the drive shaft wasn't cooperating, and something about the car's vibe felt wrong. But when another racer called him out, Chris did what he always did. He said yes. He lined up. No fear, no excuses. Just raw determination and the sound of that monstrous engine humming under his feet. The lights dropped. He launched. And that's when everything went sideways, literally. In seconds, the Elko veered off course. Something snapped. The car flew off the road in a violent blur, flipping and crashing in front of a rolling camera. Crew that couldn't believe what they were seeing. What was left wasn't a car anymore. It was mangled steel, a carcass. The frame was twisted, the engine destroyed, the body unrecognizable. Turbochargers gone. Wheels gone. The only things salvageable were a few parts, a parachute lever, a shifter, a rear housing, and even those carried the stench of fire and failure. For Chris, it wasn't just a crash, it was a heartbreak. That car wasn't just his machine, it was his soul. The Elko had history. It had Flip's fingerprints on it. It had the kind of sentimental weight you can't replace with chrome and carbon fiber. Seeing it torn apart, burned, broken, and still, was like losing a part of himself. He posted about it on his YouTube channel, Kamikaze Life, letting fans into the raw, painful aftermath. There were no sponsors in that moment, no cheering crowds, just Chris staring at the wreckage of everything he'd built. And here's the gut punch. He knew something was off. His gut told him not to run that night. But pride is louder than instinct sometimes, and it cost him dearly. The Elko was gone. The legend was over, or so it seemed. Because while most would have quit right there, Chris had one more move up his sleeve, a move that no one saw coming, and that would flip this entire story on its head. You're gonna want to see this next part. What do you do when the thing you love most gets ripped away in the blink of an eye? Most people would walk away, try to forget, try to move on. But Kamikaze Chris, he's not most people. After the Elko was destroyed, Chris did something absolutely insane, and fans loved him for it. He took the wreckage, the scorched, shattered pieces of the car that nearly ended him, and put them on eBay, not just as scrap, not as junk, but as history, a scorched weld racing wheel. a ripped-up Mickey Thompson tire, a brake rotor still coated in the scars of the crash. These weren't just parts. These were relics, battle trophies, pieces of a car that had roared through Street Outlaws history and gone out in a blaze of chaos, right in front of Discovery Channel's cameras. But here's where Chris added his signature twist. He signed them. And then, just to light the fuse, he promised that if the auction hit $25,000, he'd personally cook a steak dinner for the winning bidder, live on Facebook while wearing his racing suit. It was wild. It was weird. It was so Kamikaze Chris, and the internet couldn't get enough. The bid count exploded. Over 100 people jumped in. The total climbed past $10,000 in just days. And behind the madness was a purpose. Chris wasn't just selling broken parts. He was funding his next move. He was turning the ashes of the Elko into fuel for a comeback. Because here's the twist. Chris didn't just want another car, he wanted a rebirth. With the money from the auction, and the support of a fan base that refused to let him disappear, Chris began work on his next street weapon, a blacked-out C5 Corvette, built for speed, built from pain, and built using the very soul of the Elko. He salvaged the transmission, the engine, the drivetrain. Piece by piece, he transplanted what was left of the El Camino into the Corvette, giving the legend a second life. The Elko may have burned, but its heart still beat, inside a sleeker, faster, meaner machine. And Chris? He wasn't going anywhere. But even with a new car, a new build, and a rising fan base, his sudden disappearance from Street Outlaws left fans asking one question: where did he go? One day, Kamikaze Chris was everywhere, burning rubber, breaking records, and turning junkyard parts into street legends. And then, he was gone. No send-off, no farewell episode, just silence. Fans noticed immediately. He wasn't on Street Outlaws, no Prep Kings. He wasn't posting much. The Elko was gone. The Corvette build was under wraps. And Chris? Chris had vanished from the spotlight he once lit up. Naturally, the rumors began to swirl. Was he fired? Did he quit? Was it money? Burnout? Something darker? The speculation turned wild, with fans piecing together cryptic social media posts and old interviews like they were chasing a conspiracy. Everyone wanted to know, what happened to Kamikaze Chris? And then, finally, after 3 years of radio silence, Chris spoke. In July 2023, he broke his silence on Facebook. A short, simple message. He wouldn't be appearing in the 6th season of No Prep Kings. That was it. No explanation, no details, no drama. Just a flat confirmation that left more questions than answers. And if the fans were hungry before, now they were starving for the truth. But here's where things get interesting. Because while the TV lights dimmed, Chris never stopped racing. He didn't walk away from the game. He just took it back to where it all started. The streets. The same unforgiving roads in Oklahoma where his legend began. The same late nights. The same roar of engines under stars. Only now, he wasn't chasing airtime. He was chasing fire. His focus? The C5 Corvette. A machine that carried not just horsepower, but history. Underneath that black paint and aggressive stance were the scars and the soul of the Elko. Chris had built it not for cameras, but for war, and he brought it to every no-prep event he could find, showing up like a shadow with something to prove. And here's the twist. By stepping out of the spotlight, Chris only made his legend louder. He became the ghost of Street Outlaws, the one fans whispered about, the one racers still feared. But the story isn't over, not even close. Kamikaze Chris didn't fade. He evolved. Away from TV contracts and production deadlines, he returned to the roots that made him dangerous in the first place. Late nights, empty highways, a garage lit by flickering bulbs and powered by sheer will. He didn't need a camera crew to prove himself. The streets were enough. And the Corvette? It became something more than just a replacement for the Elko. It became a symbol. Every bolt on that car had a backstory. Every scratch had a cost. It wasn't built in a high-end race shop. It was born in a garage where Chris and his crew still checked every wire, every plug, every drop of fuel like lives depended on it. Because in some ways, they did. Racing wasn't a thrill anymore. It was therapy. It was control in a world that had tried again and again to break him. But here's the thing. No one tells you about guys like Chris. They don't just race cars. They live through them. And while the TV audience saw only the flames and the crash, the fans who stuck around saw something much deeper. Chris launched Kamikaze Motorsports, selling merch and die-cast models of his now legendary El Camino. His YouTube channel, Kamikaze Life, gave viewers an inside look at the grind, the real grind. Not the highlight reel. The struggle, the rebuilds, the empty gas tanks and sleepless nights. And it blew up. Over 70,000 subscribers followed him in. Under a year, hungry for more than just drag races. They wanted the story behind the speed, the why behind the fire. Because Chris had become more than a driver. He was a symbol of stubborn resilience, a one-man army building dreams with borrowed time and busted knuckles. But the road back was never straight. He was still chasing traction, still perfecting the Corvette, still dialing in every ounce of power the way only a man who's lost it all can. And through it all, there was a tension. A question hanging in the air that no amount of horsepower could outrun. Was he done chasing the crown? Or was the king just waiting for the right moment to return? That answer was coming. And in the final part of this story, you'll see why Kamikaze Chris is still one of the most feared names on the street. They thought he was gone, that the fire had finally burned out, that maybe, after the crash, after the silence, Kamikaze Chris would fade into the long list of forgotten street racers who once had a moment. But here's the truth that Street Outlaws never told you. Chris never quit. He never slowed down. He just stopped playing by someone else's rules. Because for Chris, this was never about fame. It was about the fight. The C5 Corvette that rose from the ashes of the Elko wasn't just a car. It was a resurrection. Every part transplanted from the wreck was a battle scar carried into a new war. The engine, the drivetrain, the soul of the El Camino. It lived on in this next-gen beast. And unlike the first time, Chris wasn't building it for TV. He was building it for himself. And that's what makes him dangerous. No deadlines, no pressure to perform on cue. Just a man in a garage, grinding through the night while the rest of the world sleeps. No pit crew, no luxury, just grit. The same kind of grit that got him on Street Outlaws in the first place. The same grit that kept him racing after every crash, every blown motor, every empty bank account. And now, he's back on the scene. No prep events, underground races, Oklahoma streets, the legend of Kamikaze. Chris continues, louder than ever. Not because a network says so, but because he chooses to show up. Fans still talk. Drivers still watch their rear view when he rolls up. Because they know what he's capable of. And here's the twist that ties it all together. This story was never about a car. It was about what it means to fight back when everything's been taken from you. To rebuild with your bare hands. To sacrifice comfort, money, and even your sanity. Just to chase that next 10 seconds of pure speed. Kamikaze Chris is proof that racing isn't about what you drive. It's about how far you're willing to go to keep driving. His journey is far from over. Because legends? They don't die. They just find another gear.